Hello everyone, my name is Kichun, and today I will be presenting my research project 2 entitled From Compliance to Operational Performance, Barrier and Enabling Factor Influencing Non-Scheduled Segregation at Source in Semiconductor Manufacturing Operation in Penang. This research aimed to understand why waste segregation practices are still inconsistent in semiconductor manufacturing, despite organizations having established waste management systems and to identify practical ways to improve operational performance. To begin with, Malaysia generates approximately 38,000 to 40,000 tons of waste every day, and a significant portion of this waste is still disposed of in landfill. One effective approach to reducing landfill dependency is proper waste segregation at source. When recyclable materials are correctly separated, recycling becomes more efficient, environmental impact can be reduced, and valuable resources can be recovered. This issue is particularly important in the manufacturing sector because manufacturing operations generate large amounts of recyclable industrial waste every day. Without proper segregations, many recyclable materials become contaminated and are eventually sent to landfill. In semiconductor manufacturing, waste segregation is not only an environmental responsibility but also an important operational practice that supports recycling efficiency and sustainability performance. However, despite the availability of waste management systems, limited studies have specifically examined the organizational and operational factors influencing waste segregation performance within semiconductor manufacturing operation in Penang. Therefore, this study was conducted to address this research gap. This study is based on three main problems. Firstly, waste segregation is often implemented primarily to comply with environmental regulations rather than to improve operational performance. As a result, although procedures are available, they are not always fully integrated into employee daily work routines. Secondly, implementation challenges still exist. Waste segregation practices are often inconsistent across departments, resulting in contamination of recyclable material, different segregation practice between work areas, and insufficient monitoring. Finally, there remains a gap between organizational policy and actual operational performance. This gap reduces recycling efficiency and increases the amount of waste sent to landfill. This issue suggests that compliance alone does not guarantee effective implementations. Organizations also need to understand what influences employees' waste segregation behavior during daily operations. This slide explains why the semiconductor industry in Penang was selected for this study. Penang is recognized as one of Malaysia's major semiconductor manufacturing hubs, with numerous wafer fabrications, assembly, and test facilities. These operations generate large amounts of recyclable non-scheduled waste every day, including plastic, paper, packaging material, and other industrial waste. At the same time, semiconductor manufacturing operates in a high volume and fast-paced production environment. Under these conditions, employees may prioritize production targets over waste segregations, especially during busy production periods. Therefore, organizations need to move beyond viewing waste segregation as merely a compliance requirement and instead integrate it into daily operational performance. Next, I will explain the significance of this study. This research contributes in four areas. Firstly, from an industrial perspective, the findings can help organizations improve the operational effectiveness of waste segregation practices and enhance recycling performance. Secondly, from a sustainability perspective, better waste segregation supports higher recycling rates and reduced landfill dependency, contributing to a more sustainable manufacturing operations. Next, from a strategy perspective, the study encouraged organizations to shift from a compliance-driven approach towards a performance-driven waste management system. Last one, from an academic perspective, this research provides empirical evidence on the organization barriers and enabling factors affecting waste segregation's performance within the semiconductor manufacturing industry in Penang. Based on the identified research gap, this study has three research objectives. The first objective is to identify the organizational and operational barriers affecting waste segregation at source. The second objective is to examine the enabling factors that influence effective waste segregation practices. The third objective is to propose practical improvement that can enhance operational waste segregation performance. These objectives are translated into three research questions. Firstly, what organizational and operational barriers affect waste segregation at source? Secondly, what enabling factors influence effective waste segregations? And finally, how can organizations improve operational performance in waste segregations? These objectives and research questions guided the overall design of this study. This slide presents the conceptual framework for my study. The framework shows the relationship between the variables examined in this study, that operational performance of waste segregation at source is influenced by two main groups of factors. The first group is barriers, which include production pressure, lack of employee awareness, and weak monitoring. The second group is the enabling factor, including management commitment, employee training and awareness, and an effective monitoring system. In this study, operational performance refers to how effectively waste segregation is implemented in daily operations, such as segregation accuracy, consistency of practice, and reduction of waste sent to landfill. The framework guided both the questionnaire design and the analysis of the research findings. I will explain the research methodology. This study adopted a quantitative research approach using a structural questionnaire consisting of 25 questions measured on a 5-point Likert scale. The questionnaire was divided into 4 sections covering current practices, barriers, enabling factor, and operational performance. Ethical considerations were also taken into account. Participation was voluntary, informed consents were obtained, and the identities of both respondents and organizations were kept anonymous. For sampling, this study used propulsive sampling involving 12 respondents. Although the sample size is relatively small, these respondents were specifically selected because they are directly involved in waste segregation activity within semiconductor manufacturing operations. Therefore, the purpose of using purposive sampling was to obtain responses from participants with relevant operational experience rather than to statistically represent the entitled semiconductor industry. After data collection using Google Forms, the responses were analyzed using descriptive statistics, means comparison, and correlations analysis. This slide summarizes the responder profile. A total of 12 responders participate in this study. Looking at the working experience chart, most responders had between 2 and 5 years of experience, while several responders had more than 10 years of industrial experience. This indicates that the participants were familiar with the waste segregation practices in semiconductor manufacturing. In terms of department distributions, responders came from several functional areas, including EHS, productions, facility, and equipment. This means that the findings reflect perspectives from different operational functions instead of relying on only one department. Overall, the responder profile supports the credibility of the findings because the participants were directly involved in operational waste management activities. Here comes the research findings of this study. 4 research constructs were analyzed. Current practices recorded a mean score of 3.95, indicating that waste segregation practices are generally implemented, although there is still room for improvement. Barriers recorded a mean score of 3.8, suggesting that several operational challenges continue to influence segregation's performance. Enabling factor achieved the highest mean score of 4.4, showing that respondents generally agree that management commitment, employee trainings, and monitoring systems support effective waste segregations. Last one, for operational performance, recorded a mean score of 4.15. This suggests that the existing waste segregation system is generally functioning well. However, the relatively lower score for barriers indicated that operational challenges still exist and may reduce performance if they are not addressed. However, when examining the individual questionnaire items, production pressure, which is questions 11, recorded the highest mean score of 4.58. This suggests that the employee understands the importance of waste segregations. However, operational priorities may take precedence during busy production periods. As a result, Good segregation practice become less consistent even when the organization has proper procedure in place. Therefore, maintaining consistent segregation performance remains a practical challenge despite existing organization support. Based on these findings, several important conclusions can be drawn. Firstly, enabling factors recorded the highest mean score, indicating that management commitment, employee trainings, and monitoring system play an important role in supporting effective waste segregation practices. Second, although operational performance was generally positive, production pressure remained the strongest barrier. This indicates that although current waste segregation performance is satisfactory, consistency may decline during periods of high production demand. Thus, organizations should not assume that having procedure alone is sufficient. The findings suggest that employee behavior is influenced not only by written procedure but also by operational conditions. Therefore, improving waste segregations required both organization support and practical implementations during daily operations. These findings are consistent with previous studies, which suggest that management commitment and employee awareness influence environmental performance. However, the study also showed that operational pressure remains an important factor that organizations need to manage. From an industrial perspective, organizations should integrate waste segregation into routine operational activity rather than treating it purely as a compliance requirement. From a managerial perspective, continuous trainings, monitorings, and feedback should be maintained to encourage consistent employee behavior. Environmentally, improving waste segregations can increase recycling efficiency while reducing landfill disposal. Based on this finding, this study recommends conducting refresher training during production peak periods, standardizing waste segregation signage, integrating segregation performance into departmental EHS KPIs, and perform regular waste segregation audit with feedback sessions. Finally, I would like to conclude my presentations. This study successfully identified the key barriers and enabling factors influencing non-scheduled waste segregation at source within semiconductor manufacturing operations in Penang. The findings demonstrate that organizational support, particularly management commitment, employee training and monitoring, contribute positively to operational waste segregation's performance. However, production pressure remains the key operational challenge because it can reduce the consistency of waste segregations despite existing organizational support. Like any research, this study has several limitations. Firstly, this study involved 12 purposefully selected respondents. Although the sample was appropriate for the exploratory nature of this study, the findings may not fully represent the wider semiconductor industry. Secondly, the research focused only on the semiconductor manufacturing industry in Penang. Lastly, the findings were based on responder perceptions collected through questionnaire. Therefore, future research could involve a larger sample size, include different manufacturing sectors, and combine quantitative survey with qualitative interview to obtain deeper insight into organizational behavior. Overall, I hope that this finding of this study can contribute to improve waste segregation practice and support more sustainable manufacturing operations. Thank you for your attention.